Good morning. My name is Brendan Manning. I'm the Vice President of Education and Environment here with the AGC of New York. I want to welcome everybody to our webinar on Davis-Bacon fundamentals, what contractors need to know. Today, I want to introduce Aurora Escott, client training and content specialist with LCP Tracker. With more than 9 years of experience in certified payroll reporting, labor compliance and prevailing wage requirements, Aurora specializes in helping contractors understand and comply with Davis-Bacon and related labor standards. So with that, I'll turn it over to Aurora. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. Appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I hope we have our coffee right next to us because we've got a lot to go through today. Quick recap. My name is Aurora Escott, and I'm going to be your training specialist for today. Now, as Brandon had mentioned a little bit about me, I've got about a little over 9 years of experience in the construction industry. And I'm willing to bet, like many of us here, I was tossed into the pool of prevailing wages and was told, yo, sink or swim, figure it out. So, really, my goal for everyone here today is to provide you with some type of arm floaties or a life jacket of some sort so that when you are conducting your your paper trail or you're going out and doing field wage interviews on these federal public works projects, you've got the basic understandings, rules, and requirements in order to succeed on these projects. So with that being said, let's keep going. Quick disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just here teaching you guys about this stuff. Okay, so let's take a quick look at our agenda because we've got a lot to cover. I'm going to start things off with a bit of a history lesson. Then I'm going to go into a couple of other things, and that includes confusing topics. Who is responsible for what? We're going to go over the wages, fringes, and how to calculate overtime aspect. And then finally, I'm going to leave things off with a couple of helpful publications. I want to give you some tools so that after this training, you will be able to reference really quickly exactly the things that I reference on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so let's start off with our history lesson. Like, how on earth did we end up having this thing called the Davis-Bacon Act? Why is it so important? Okay, here's a little story time. I love stories. I love sharing stories. Okay, so back in 1927, there was an Alabama contractor that won a bid to build a veterans hospital in Long Island, New York. Your guys' bread and butter, like that's your area, right? So go ahead and take a look at the map for me, if you will. All the way down south, that's Alabama. And all the way up north is you guys, New York. That is a huge difference in geography, in economy, and you guessed it, cost. So, what this Alabama contractor did was like, nah, forget hiring from the local populace in Long Island, New York. I'm going to keep costs short by importing South workers from the South, primarily African American, pay them pennies on the dollar, boot them up to New York, house them in really terrible conditions, and that's how I'm going to save a couple bucks. Well, as you can imagine, this did not go over well with the local workers and contractors. They were very upset about this. It's like, how can this guy be coming in and undercutting our local community? That's not cool. Someone needs to do something about this. So, two people did. Senator James Davis, he was a Republican from Pennsylvania, and Congressman Robert Bacon, he was a Republican from New York, got together and were like, Wonder Twin powers, activate. Let's create the Davis Bacon Act. And what this essentially did was that it prevented just this situation from happening. It prevents outside contractors from coming into a local job area and undercutting costs. And it sets a minimum wage, what we now more commonly refer to as a prevailing wage for workers. And so this is the Davis Bacon Act. And as time went on, additional laws and regulations were passed and tacked onto the Davis Bacon Act, which in total is now referenced as the Davis Bacon and Related acts. And we're going to talk about the difference on that more here shortly. Now I'm going to give us a timeline here because there has been very minimal changes to the Davis-Bacon Act if we're looking at a timeline. So the Davis-Bacon Act was enacted in 1931. If 1931 is kind of ringing a bell as far as my economic as far as my economic peaks here go, yeah, you would be right. This is right around that Great Depression era. Crazy timing, right? And then it was later amended less than a handful of times after that, with the most recent changes happening a few years ago at this point, 2023. Now, these changes that were implemented in 2023 are more commonly referred to as the final rules for the Davis-Bacon Act. And this was the largest regulation update in over 40 years. There was a major overhaul. We're going to talk about a couple of these changes too that may affect your teams specifically. Now, I also want to let you guys know that there are, I believe, 3 parts that are currently in litigation from these final rules. We're not going to go super deep into the litigation details, but really the point that I want us to take away from this slide is that there will be changes in the news happening in regards to Davis-Bacon. So keep an eye out, keep an ear out for anything that might pop up in your news feed. Okay, let's dive a little deeper into the laws and regulations. So now we're going to talk about the difference between the Davis-Bacon Act and the Davis-Bacon and related acts. Okay, now the Davis-Bacon Act is for contracts that are over $2,000 that are entered directly with the United States federal government or the District of Columbia. And this would be for construction, alteration, repair of public buildings or public works. Aurora, it's too early in the morning for this. Give me an example. Okay, no problem. So let's just say you're a contractor that has a direct contract with the U.S. Department of Navy or the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Those contracts would be subject to the Davis-Bacon Act. Why? Because you are directly contracted with the federal government or an entity of the federal government. In contrast, we have the Davis-Bacon related acts. Now, projects that would fall under the Davis-Bacon related acts are those that are federally funded or federally assisted. Like I'm talking receiving money in some way, shape, or form or support from the federal government. And that could be like grants, loans, or loan guarantees or insurance. And yes, it would also be for contracts over $2,000 and for the same type of work, construction, alteration, repair of public buildings or public works. Aurora, give me an example. Okay, I got you guys. So let's just say, I'm going to pick on California because California is my home state. So let's say we're talking about Department of Transportation projects. So we've got federal DOT. Now, federal DOT does not directly contract out with the local populace saying, hey, I want to build an interstate that cuts through several states. They won't directly put out a project to bid that way. Instead, what they do is they provide funds for individual states themselves to build that interstate. So, for example, if Caltrans, which is the DOT department in the state of California, if Caltrans decides to take that federal money that they receive and contract out several projects for whatever highway work, then those projects that use federal money would be subject to the Davis-Bacon and related acts. So that's the main difference there. Davis-Bacon Act, direct contract with federal government. Davis-Bacon related acts uses money or some type of funding or support from the federal government. Let's keep going because there's a couple of other laws that we need to be aware of when we talk about the Davis-Bacon Act. The first one that we're going to talk about is Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act. That is a mouthful. I refuse to say it 5 times fast. So instead, I just say QASA. So QASA sets up the weekly overtime limit. It tells us, all right, so for any hours that are over 40 or that are worked over 40 hours in a work week, all of that other time is going to be paid at overtime. Now, if contractors do not pay overtime after 40 hours in a work week, then there's a little bit of violation paid per day per employee. Now, currently that violation is 33 bucks per day per employee. That number was updated back in January of last year. Honestly, I'm really surprised that the violation number has not increased for this year. Usually they do it annually. So keep an eye out in the news. You never know. In addition, QASA applies to most Davis-Bacon projects. We also have this thing called Copeland Anti-Kickback Act. Now, the Copeland Anti-Kickback Act essentially says no kickbacks. Now, for those of you that are newer to the prevailing wage game, a kickback is when funds go from the contractor to the employee, and then for whatever reason, the employee kicks back some of their funds back to the employer. Now, this is aside from bona fide deductions, okay? And really, I like to use an example of this example of a kickback. So it's from a movie, and this movie was set kind of like in the 80s or so. And essentially, it's these people that walk up to a dock foreman and they're saying, "Hey, we're noticing that you've got a lot of projects coming in through your dock, and we want in on this game. We want to join in on the project. We want to make some money." And so this foreman says, "Oh, you want in on these projects? You want to work for me? Well, all right, but you got to pay me a little bit of your paycheck for the opportunity to even work on this job site." So that right there is a blatant example of a kickback happening. Now, for some of us that are a little bit more in the know of public works and prevailing wages, you may have heard that kickbacks tended to be an issue really back in like the 70s and the 80s. And some of us may be thinking, is that really such a big issue nowadays? And the answer is yes. This is another story that I really enjoy sharing because I like to drill this into people, especially when you are doing your deductions for your employees, where this individual was conducting a field wage interview, and we're going to talk about that. And they were observing a job site. So this individual saw that the employees were receiving their paychecks. Okay, that's interesting. That's nothing too crazy. Then they saw this van coming into the job site. Okay, what's this van doing here? They loaded up the employees onto the van. Okay, now things are getting a little freaky. The van takes them to a location where they can cash out their checks. Okay, now some real red flags are popping up. And then they see employees taking parts of their cashed checks and passing that back to their foreman who drove them to that location. So that is a blatant example, real world example of a kickback happening. So a kickback could happen in cash, or maybe it's another type of arrangement. But bottom line is no kickbacks, guys. Okay, let's go into some more fun. So we were talking about prevailing wages at the federal level. Okay, now we're going to take off that hat for a moment and we're going to talk state, because some states took a look at what the federal government was doing and was like, that sounds like a good idea. I think I'm going to implement something like that, where if public works projects happen in my state and use federal state money, then they need to follow state prevailing wage rules. And that's where we get little Davis-Bacon acts is what they're commonly referred to. So currently we know of 28 states that have their own state prevailing wage programs, including the District of Columbia. And there's about 7 counties that we know of that have their own little Davis-Bacon acts. And there's 3 cities that we know of that have their own little Davis-Bacon acts. So I want us to take a moment to pause and imagine for me, if you will, You're on a project in New York, lovely state, and this public works project receives state money. Now, you know you're going to have to follow state prevailing wage rules. But what if this project receives federal funds too? Well, now you're going to have to make sure you're following both rules. So now you no longer have one set of rules to follow. You are now on a dual funded project, okay, where you're going to have to follow the more stringent of both uh, both sets of rules. Now let's take that one step further. Let's say you are in a state receiving federal funds that is in a specific county, in a specific city, that at each level has its own little Davis-Bacon rules. Well, now you're no longer looking at a dual funded project. You are now looking at a multi-funded project, and you're going to have to make sure that you're following all of their rules and requirements. So really, the key thing that I want us to take away from this particular slide is to know how your project is being funded. Take a close look at your contract documentation and see, where is this money coming from? Okay, so now we've got the Davis-Bacon Act for direct federal projects, and we've got the Davis-Bacon and related acts for federally funded or assisted projects. Let's talk about who exactly is being paid this minimum wage, these prevailing wages. And the answer is those that are laborers and mechanics. Now, this is not the laborers and mechanics that we're probably thinking of like people pushing a broom or people fixing up an engine in a piece of heavy equipment. No, these are more general terms. And what these terms mean are workers whose duties are manual or physical in nature, or that use tools or are performing the work of a specific trade. I'll give you guys an example. I like to think of the old school term blue-collared workers. My old man was a truck driver. He was a blue-collared worker. My brother, my uncle, my cousin, they're all electricians. They use tools of their specific trade and would be considered laborers and mechanics as well. So they would be covered for prevailing wages. The individuals that would not be covered for prevailing wages would be, for example, the payroll clerk that's in the office or the warehouse assistant that is loading up the vehicles with the equipment. So they would not be necessarily paid prevailing wages because they're not doing work that is manual or physical in nature or using the tools performed of a work or a trade. They're not picking up a tool belt, right? They're not out in the field. Speaking of, let's talk about that. When is a laborer or mechanic actually paid prevailing wages? Is it when they're driving into the warehouse to pick up their company vehicle and go to the job site? Is it when they're en route in between that warehouse and job site? How about from one job location to another? When are they covered? So this is where we need to define site of work. Okay, now the site of work is the actual physical location of the project, or it could be a virtually adjacent location to the site of work. And we're going to define that real quick in a second. Or it could be a secondary location. I like to use examples, as you guys have probably realized. So I'm going to tackle virtually adjacent first. Okay, now being virtually adjacent would be, say, for example, flaggers. Okay, now flaggers in a previous life used to be my bread and butter. As a flagger, let's say you're on a project where there's a manhole being patched up. They're fixing something in that manhole. Now, the people that are working directly on that manhole, that are using the tools of their trades, they would be considered working on the actual site of work. They're working on that manhole. The flaggers are not working directly on that manhole, right? But they are providing a service. They are using the tools of their trade. They are contributing to that project. It's just that they are adjacent to that job site. They're a couple miles down that way and a couple miles up that way, and managing traffic so that the work can be completed in a safe manner. Those flaggers would be considered on a virtually adjacent job site and would be covered for prevailing wages. Now, a secondary site of work has to meet a couple of things. Okay, now the secondary site of work would be a location where a significant part of the building of the project happens, and this does not include a location that manufactures prefabricated parts. This secondary site of work would need to create um, items for that project that cannot be purchased to the by the general public, and the site needs to be established exclusively so for a specific amount of time. That's a lot of mumbo jumbo, Aurora. Give us an example. I got you. The example that I like to use is building a bridge. You've got a river, you know where your bridge is going to start on one side of the bank and where it's going to end on the other side of the bank. You're not going to toss up a bridge right there at the side of the bank. No, you're probably going to have a secondary location where you're building a majority of the bridge by pieces, and then you're going to transport those pieces over to the side of the river, and you're going to Lego it together and build the bridge that way. So that secondary location is where a significant part of the work is happening, and it is creating items and pieces that cannot be purchased by the general public. And I'd be willing to bet, according to the contract details, that location is probably going to be there for a specific amount of time, aka when the project is finished, that secondary site of work, poof, it'll be gone. So that location where the workers are constructing portions of the bridge, those workers and that work would be covered for prevailing wages. So that would be the secondary site of work. Okay, so now at this point, we're going to pivot a little and we're going to talk about the new rules for a second and what they've changed. So we're going to start off with terminology because there was a lot of effort to standardize terminology in the final rules back in 2023, remember? So we got to remember that the Davis-Bacon Act was written almost actually over 90 years at this point. It was an old law that had outdated verbiage. They spoke a little more formally and spoke a little differently. So now, in an effort to try to be a little bit more gender neutral and to clarify responsibilities, certain definitions and terms were updated. So, for example, employee was changed to worker and journeyman became journey worker. There were additional clarifications made to terms like contractor, subcontractor, contract, agency, and awarding bodies. It's nice to have definitions, and it's especially helpful when it comes to naming who is responsible for what in contracts. All right, let's keep going. So, foremen are now dubbed foreperson, and I swear it's 3 years later, and I'm still having trouble having this term roll off the tip of my tongue. So, if y'all are having issues with this, you are not alone, okay? I get the feeling that many of us here have an idea of when these four peeps are covered for prevailing wages which is when they would pick up a tool belt and start hammering away. But the big question is, when would they not be covered for prevailing wages? And this one has a couple of layers to it. The first one is, are they a bona fide executive of the company? Do they get paid a salary? For example, what if they make about $1,800 a week? That's about 45 bucks an hour. Is that 45 bucks an hour enough to meet prevailing wages if they decide to pick up that tool and start hammering away? We need to think about that. The next layer is, how much time do they actually spend as a laborer or mechanic on the job site? Lucky for us, there's a threshold. If they spend less than 20% of their time doing manual labor in a work week, they may not be covered. Lucky us. And then lastly, if the work is supervisory in nature, they would not be covered under Davis-Bacon. For example, supervisory in nature would be doing stuff like administrative work or people management, that type of work. Business owners, let's talk about them for a moment. So, business owners are not considered to be laborers and mechanics if they own at least a bona fide 20% equity interest in the business enterprise. For those that are not business owners, don't worry about that terminology all too much. From my peeps out there that are business owners, you probably understand exactly what I'm talking about. And in addition to that, they need to be actively engaged in the management of the enterprise. And by management, I mean you're making hiring decisions, you're managing employee grievances, you're doing executive work. Basically, you would not be covered for prevailing wages if you meet those items. Now, the exemption for you does not apply if you make no management decisions, if you're not supervising anyone, and if you have no authority over personnel. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, welders. This one's a fun one. So, for welders, typically welders are not listed on wage determinations. Typically. And the reason being is because it is incidental, typically, to other classifications. Other classifications are already doing welding type of work, such as iron workers, plumbers, and sheet metal workers. Really, there's a microscopic chance that this happens, but welders could be a subclassification. And really, I've only heard about these instances from friends of friends on East Coast projects that involve heavy construction. And that is like a microscopic chance. Very rarely do welders become a subclassification. It is something that happens few and far between projects. Very rarely does it happen. Okay, helpers. Now, helpers have gone through several ups and downs throughout the years, but I'm going to fast forward to nowadays. Okay, now nowadays, helpers are not considered their own classification. If they're doing the work of a journey worker, even though if this person is a newbie and is going half the speed of smell of your most senior journey worker, you got to pay them the journey worker rates. Only bona fide apprentices, or in the context of Department of Transportation projects, trainees, only they are allowed to be paid below prevailing wages. Okay, so helpers, got to pay them as a journey worker unless they're an apprentice. Okay, flaggers, we've mentioned this earlier from my previous example. They are virtually adjacent on public works projects. They are counted and are included to be paid prevailing wages. Okay. A recent update. This one is not from the final updates in 2023, but I do want to talk about this now. Because how do you track, how do you report who is on your public works job site? Well, contractors need to fill out the WH 347, the Certified Payroll Report. Now, you don't have to use this exact form. You can use any version so long as that version is reporting everything that the WH 347 asks you to. Now, caution though, caution, because there's two versions of this bad boy floating around right now, okay? The most recent version is this version that you see on your screen. It's the orange one, okay? This one is important for you to start using, or at least introducing to your team now, because the previous version of this is in all white, and that is the old form, and that form is valid until September 30th of this year, which means the deadline's coming up to make the switch. You got to start using this orange version pretty gosh darn soon, because this version has removed employee addresses. You're now reporting more fringe benefit information. The statement of compliance merged. There was a couple of other things that were happening. Now you may be wondering or thinking, gosh, you know, Aurora, the orange version, it just looks so intimidating. I feel you. I understand that. I had the same thoughts when I first looked at it. I'm like, oh, the color's pleasing, but that's a lot of new boxes. What am I supposed to do here? The cool thing is the Department of Labor at the very tippy top of this new version has a link to instructions. Perfect. I would highly advise that you take a look at that set of instructions and go through it. Because another cool thing that the Department of Labor did too is that it created a page where you can go in, punch in your information, and then it generates the certified payroll report for you. So I think that that is a really cool little feature that the Department of Labor tossed at us. So my 2 cents here is, whew, calm down. It's okay. The new form is not as intimidating as it looks. Okay, so before I move on here, I wanted to see if there were any questions so far in our Q&A.
Nothing to this point. So
Okay,
yeah, just as a reminder, if anybody does have any questions, I've had one quick question just on an AV issue, but please type in any questions you may have in the Q&A box, and we can jump into those.
fantastic. Thank you, Brendan. Appreciate you. Okay, so let's talk about some confusing topics. Material suppliers. Now, the final rules back in 2023 made a couple of changes here, but because of the injunction that's happening, the three parts that are in litigation of the final rules, material suppliers is back to business as usual. Okay, now material suppliers, typically the delivery of materials or supplies to a job site is not covered under Davis-Bacon, that delivery time. However, if that driver gets out and starts doing labor mechanical work, and I'm talking, oh, they want to be super helpful, they want to jump onto a forklift, and they want to start unloading materials and supplies, guess what? Heavy equipment operators operate those forklifts. Now that material supplier, that driver, would be considered a heavy equipment operator, and they would be covered under Davis-Bacon rules. So keep in mind as well that state laws may be different in regards to material suppliers. So again, it's really important to understand where your funds are coming from for your particular project. Let's keep going. So tire and equipment repair. For enforcement purposes, if these employees spend more than 20% of their time in a work week on the job site doing tire equipment repair work, then guess what? They would be covered under Davis-Bacon for all that time spent on that job site for the week. Alrighty. Oh, this one grinds my gears. Okay. 1099ers. So I cringe every time I hear someone say, "Oh, I've got a 1099 employee." Oh, let's pause here because a 1099 document is stating that the individual is an independent contractor. These independent contractors send in their own payroll reports. I used to know someone who would hire certain people as 1099 contractors to avoid paying taxes when they should have been on their payroll. So, should 1099ers ever be a part of your payroll? The answer is no. They should never be submitted as part of your payroll because, again, these are independent contractors. They submit their own. And if for whatever reason you list a 1099er in your team's certified payroll report under craft and classification, I bet you some good money you're going to have several questions and maybe even an audit pop up because people are really going to be scrutinizing if you know your employee employer responsibilities. Whew, okay. So let's talk about trucking. So this was my daddy's bread and butter, as I had mentioned earlier. So the final rules of 2023 also made some changes here, but because of the litigation that's happening right now, it's business as usual. So we're going to talk business as usual for trucking. Now, trucking is covered for any time that's spent working on the site of work, for the transportation of supplies and materials on that site of work, for the transportation between offsite locations and the actual site of work, and for time spent loading or unloading supplies, so long as the amount of time isn't de minimis. Now, de minimis means like tiny and minute. So let's say, for example, you've got a trucker that's unloading and loading materials or whatnot or what have you. And they spend about an hour, maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours a day loading and unloading stuff. Now, that might seem pretty insignificant for that particular day. But let's say they spent that same amount of time doing it for the rest of the week. So, spending about an hour to 2 hours Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that would be 2, 4, 6, 8, about potentially 10 hours of loading and unloading time out of a 40-hour work week. All of a sudden, things don't look de minimis anymore. So really, you're going to want to use your best judgment when looking at your trucker's time loading and unloading supplies. Okay, owner-operators. So when we're talking about owner-operators, I'm not talking about operators of equipment like bulldozers, backhoes, cranes, or welding machines. That's totally different. Okay, that's heavy equipment operators. Owner operators are the guys that drive those low boys, them big rigs. Now, those owner operators would submit their own certified payroll reports. Now, in their certified payroll reports, they need to state they would need to note down that they are the owner operator, and they would also need to show the hours, they would not need to show the hours worked or the rates paid. However, I would like to add a little note here that sometimes awarding bodies or prime contractors may say, I know that Davis Bacon does not require owner operators to show their hours or their rates paid, but I want more information. So I'm going to require that anyway. They could do that, and that's totally up to them. Now, in my previous life, working for a subcontractor, I would always want to make sure that I'm satisfying my clients and reporting whatever they need, even if it goes above and beyond what I am required to provide according to Davis Bacon rules. In addition, if owner operators are working for a trucking broker, then those owner operators would typically be considered employees, and only in that event can they be included on the trucking broker's certified payroll report. A trucking broker would need to make sure that they list the owner operators as the right type of driver or teamster. But really, that's the only time that something funky is going to happen. Okay, and there's my little tidbit there where agencies could enforce rules that are stricter than the Davis-Bacon Act. Okay, so we're probably thinking, these are a lot of rules that you're tossing at us. Okay, and these are rules that we got to follow. Okay, great. But who is responsible for what? Because what happens when you're on a public works project that is subject to Davis-Bacon and there's 100 different contractors and there's the prime that's trying to manage that? And what about the awarding body? What are they doing? Are they just sitting down twiddling their thumbs waiting for the project to be completed? Who is responsible for what? Let's take a moment to do a little bit of imaginative work. Okay, I want us to imagine a pyramid. Okay, now sitting on top of this pyramid like a beautiful crown jewel, that's your awarding body. Okay, your awarding body is saying, hey, I've got a library that I want to build. Who wants to build this library for me? Who wants to bid on this? Your prime contractors are going to be at the top of that pyramid. And those prime contractors are saying, I'm going to bid on that particular project. I can build that library for you. Now, if and when that prime contractor wins that project, they can choose to self-perform that project, or they can choose to contract out portions of the work to subcontractors. And in general, that's the whole scheme of who is doing what at a high level. But let's actually talk about the details because it's important to know what you're responsible for, right? It keeps you from getting lawsuits, keeps you out of the headlines because, after all, your reputation is priceless as a contractor. And you want to make sure that the jobs keep coming back and that you can show that you're compliant and that you're knowing that you know what you do on these public works projects. So we're going to take a quick look at awarding body responsibilities. When I say awarding body, I also interchange it with agency because usually it's utilities or cities or school district governing bodies of some sort that put out the request for bids. So these parties would need to make sure that they're adding in the right wage determination into their contracts. They need to make sure that they're also stating in their contracts, hey, this is a public works project. And the way that they do that is by adding in the verbiage from 29 CFR 5.5. We're going to get to that. But essentially, as contractors, you need to make sure that you're looking in your contracts and seeing 29 CFR 5.5, exactly that, in your documentation. Now, awarding bodies are also responsible for guiding you if there's multiple wage determinations for a particular project. Remember how I mentioned you might have a dual funded project that you run into? That's when you would have more than one wage determination. They're also responsible for updating wage determination if an additional scope of work or time frame is added to the contract. So in the final rules, it is now no longer the case where a project starts and the wage determination is locked in for the life of the project. Doesn't happen anymore. Now, if there is significant additional changes to the scope of work or a significant addition to the time frame of a project added onto a contract, or if it's a indefinite quantity project, then those projects would require an updated wage determination. Really, those instances are not all too often that I've heard of yet that happens, but it's always good to keep an ear out for that. Awarding bodies, conformances, they're responsible for submitting the conformance requests to the Department of Labor. And we're going to talk about what a conformance is. They're responsible for reviewing certified payroll reports, and they're also responsible for conducting field wage interviews. And we're going to go into those as well a little later. Now, potential consequences, because they're not infallible, they're run by humans just like the rest of us, and sometimes we make mistakes. Some consequences for awarding bodies is they could have stricter federal oversight. They could be forced to use an electronic solution. They could have challenges to their authority. Who likes being questioned all the time? I don't. But sometimes it is necessary, right, for self-growth. Anyways, so the cost of cleanup, such as restitution, or they could potentially face the loss of funding. Now, prime contractors, let's get into the good stuff, right? Because we're contractors here. So, as prime contractors, you are responsible for making sure that the wage determination that is in your contract provided by the awarding body is the right one. Because sometimes that doesn't always happen. You're looking at a wage determination, you're like, something's not right here. This wage determination looks to be a little too old for this particular contract. So it's important to know what you're looking at on wage determination. So you got to learn how to read it too. And in addition to that, you also got to know if you're missing any particular craft and classifications on a wage determination, because sometimes these wage determinations don't list all of the craft and classes, right? They might be missing stuff. They might be missing some. So that's when a conformance request comes into play. And we're going to talk about that, like I said. As far as contracts go, you also need to make sure that you are putting in the wage determination itself in all of your subcontracts. Like, I'm not talking about just yours. You also need to make sure that any of your subcontractors' subcontracts are also including the wage determination. In addition, remember that 29 CFR 5.5 verbiage I'd mentioned in the previous slide? Yeah, I bet you guys didn't. I'm just kidding. It's still way too early in the morning. So you need to make sure that you are also including in your contracts 29 CFR 5.5, because you need to tell your contractors this is a federally funded project. This is subject to Davis-Bacon rules. So make sure to write that in Sharpie somewhere that you can see it. 29 CFR 5.5. Write it on your arm, write it on your firstborn child's head. I don't know, and I don't care. 29 CFR 5.5. Make it clear to your subcontractors that they are required to follow Davis-Bacon rules. Do not make it a surprise for them. You are setting yourself a world of hurt if you don't. Certified payroll reports. You got to read them, review them, make sure that your subcontractors are in line, and then you got to submit that to the awarding bodies. Now, friendly note here as well, certified payroll reports, they need to be submitted and collected on a weekly basis, okay? Now, job sites. On job sites, you need to make sure that you're also posting the wage determination in an area that is easily viewable to the employees on the job site, and also put up any job site posters too. This, again, in an area where they can easily be visible. And then finally, you got to make sure that your subcontractors are following the rules for Davis-Bacon. Let's talk about subcontractors. What are their responsibilities? They are responsible for, again, providing 29 CFR 5.5 verbiage in all of their subcontracts as well. So they need to make sure that they're writing it in Sharpie on their arms or on their firstborn child's head. Okay. In addition, if they have any subcontractors that they decide they want to add on to the job site, they have a responsibility for letting their primes know, hey, I'm bringing in someone else to the job as well. FYI, wanted to let you know. In addition, they need to make sure that they're monitoring all of their sub-tiers for compliance too. Why? Because at all levels of contractors, we've got some major potential consequences. For my primes, you may be held responsible for the non-compliance of subcontractors at any tier level. So you got to be on your game when you're looking at the certified payroll reports and any backup documentation that you're collecting. In refusal to pay cases, contracting agencies can withhold funds to cover restitution. That's not fun. You could face possible contract termination. There could be cross withholding. An agency could say, hey, contractor, we noticed that you're on multiple projects. And in this particular project, you're not having your stuff together. Okay, you're falling behind with your Davis-Bacon responsibilities. I'm not going to pay you until you fix up what you're messing up for all of these other projects as well. So that would be an example of cross withholding. You could also face debarment, both at an individual level and for your company, for 3 years for Davis-Bacon projects. And you can also face you could face civil or criminal prosecution for faking anything on certified payroll reports. Not bueno. Okay, let's pivot again to wage determinations, because I've tossed that term out a lot, right? But for my newbies out here, you're probably thinking, Aurora, you've been spitting some big game about wage determinations. What exactly are they? Okay, so a wage determination, which is also commonly referred to as a wage decision, essentially is a list of wages for a project. They are for a specific county or region and state. Okay, now these wage determinations are found on the government website, www.sam.gov. And I used to have this idea that the Department of Labor would just, out of thin air, say, how much should we pay a carpenter? $30 $30 an hour. No, that's not how it actually happens. So what happens is that the Department of Labor actually conducts surveys. They send these surveys across the US and they ask contractors like you guys, hey, how much are you paying your carpenters, your electricians, your laborers, your iron workers? And they'll gather that information and then create these wage determinations with rates based off of those surveys. So when surveys come to your door, I encourage you to fill out those surveys and submit them because that's how we keep these wages up to date. And trust me, I have seen modern day wage determinations with rates from back in the 90s, and that's not a fun sight to look at. Seeing how some crafts and classifications are still being paid $6 and some change. It's heartbreaking to see that. In addition, these wage determinations, these are the ones that need to be posted on the job site. I'd mentioned that before. Now, another thing too is that these wage determinations are created as well based off of 4 different construction types. So in the world of Davis-Bacon, it recognizes 4. Okay, let's talk about those real quick. And trust me, this will all make sense when we are actually taking a real close look at a wage determination. Now, in regards to the 4 different construction types, I do want to also toss out that all agency memorandums 130 and 131 list beautiful examples of each different construction type. Let's get into it. So the first construction type is residential. Now, what would be included for residential? This would be for projects that are up to 4 stories in height. This would include single family homes, townhouses, and apartment buildings that are no more than 4 stories tall. Now, this would also include incidental items. Whew! Hold the phone, Aurora. What do we mean by incidental? So this would be for work that would potentially fall into another construction type, but would not if it meets these 2 thresholds. If the incidental work is below 20% of the total project cost or less than $3.3 million. I'll give you guys an example. Let's say we're building an apartment complex. An apartment complex might also need a parking area. This parking area would potentially be covered under another construction type, which would be highway work. Now, rather than looking for a highway wage determination, you could pause for a moment and see, okay, well, what's the percentage of cost to build this parking area compared to the rest of the project? Is it under the 20% threshold or is it below 3.3 million? Okay, if it's under one of those 2 thresholds, you're good. You do not have to go out looking for another wage determination. You just need to use your residential construction type because that work would be considered incidental. Let's keep going. So the second construction type is building. Now, for building, this is similar to residential, except that it would be for buildings that are, for example, apartment complexes that are over 5 stories in height. It would be for housing people, machinery, equipment, or supplies like fire stations, hotels, office buildings, etc., etc. This could also potentially be commercial buildings. Now, the third construction type is highway. This is where a lot of the potential incidental work might fall into. Now, highway work includes roads, streets, highways, runways, taxiways, believe it or not. So, sidewalks as well. That could potentially be highway construction work and any other paving work that is not incidental to the other construction types. The last one is heavy construction. Now, heavy construction includes construction that does not fit really nicely and easily into the other construction categories. Okay, heavy construction would include stuff like water and sewage lines, railroads, antenna towers, major bridges, and it even includes new construction like renewable energy projects. You may be thinking, oh, that's a lot of spaghetti that you're hoping will stick to the wall. Give me an example. Give me something concrete. I got you. Let's actually take a look at a wage determination. This will all make sense here in just a moment. So at the very tippy top, we have the wage determination number and its issue date. This is how we identify a wage determination, by its number. Below that is the state that this wage determination is applicable for. Below that is the construction type. There we go. So in this example, we're seeing that this wage determination is for highway work. Now, certain wage determinations will have more than one construction type listed. And if that's the case, you're a lucky duck. So sometimes you might see heavy, highway, and building together. Sometimes you may see all four. Sometimes you may see just two. And other times like this, you may see that it is applicable for just one construction type. Below that is the specific county that this wage determination is applicable for. Sometimes you'll have certain cases where in counties, they just give you a general region. In this case, we have, this is for the entire state of Alaska. So below that, we then see the modification number and date. Now for projects that don't have, or I say projects, but for during the construction time where the wage determination has not locked in yet, these modification numbers and dates would be very beneficial to review. Alrighty, now I'm gonna go back here for a quick second. So typically, there would be executive orders listed here too that would state if there is an applicable federal minimum wage for a wage determination. Very recently, we had Executive Order 13658 come out and say, okay, we're going to be setting a minimum wage for Davis-Bacon projects, and that minimum wage is going to be $13 and some change, $13.65. This would be for a specific set of projects. These projects would be contracts that are entered between January 1st of 2015 and January 29th of 2022. So very specific date range. This executive order became effective for all time worked starting May 11th, ending on December 31st of this year. So there's a lot of little stipulations here. So I would say when you're going through your wage determination, stop and think, okay, does my contract fall in between the dates of 2015 and 2022? Okay. And if so, I'm most likely going to have to follow this executive order. So if you see a crafter classification listed that is less than $13 and some change, and it does fall into that contract time frame, you're going to have to make sure you're paying those employees at least $13.65. Okay, let's take a look at the actual rates here and the crafts and classes. So another cool thing about wage determinations is that they tell us how the Department of Labor got those rates listed. At the top here, we see an identifier. This tells us how what the rates were based off of. So if the identifier has the first four letters of the craft name listed, then that is a union identifier, meaning the Department of Labor used union rates to generate these rates. If the identifier has SU at the beginning, then those would be considered survey or open shop rates. Those are the rates that are based off of open shop information. Weighted average is a mix of both. Now, rated average rates, I don't see them as often, but the union identifier would have UAVG at the front. This is particularly handy to know when you are creating conformance requests, and we're getting to that in just a second here. Below that is your list of crafts and classifications. A craft is the general type of work being done, and a classification is the specific type of work being done. In this example, we see electricians for tunnel work, and for classifications, we have cable splicers and electricians. Okay, so remember that I had mentioned that sometimes a wage determination may not list all of their crafts and classes. That can happen. So what happens? What do you do when you run into that? When you have a wage determination that only lists 5 labor rates, because that does happen. You will run into those. Do you simply make one up and add it to the wage determination yourself? Do you use a classification that closely resembles what your teammates are doing? You know, if you squint your eyes and tilt your head a little bit, or say, forget it, just classify them all as laborers. That's what the wage determination says, and it's cheap and easy. Any of these three? Maybe? No. The answer is none of these are good ideas. In fact, these are all really terrible ideas. So not only would you get into hot legal trouble for doing any one of these, you're probably going to be severely underpaying your employees and be faced with a lot of penalties for that. So, what you should be doing is creating and submitting conformance requests. Now, a conformance request means that you are asking the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division to conform the wage determination to include your missing crafting class. So, you would be using Form SF 1444 to draft up your conformance request. You would state the crafting classes that are missing. You would provide a rate that you believe you should be paying these missing crafts and classes and submit that to your awarding body. Now, all agency memorandums 213 and 233 are going to be your best friends. They will tell you exactly how to create a conformance request, how to generate the best rates possible for your missing crafts and classes. So don't sleep on that. All agency memorandums 213 and 233. Look them up. Okay, so a quick overview of how the conformance workflow actually looks like. So prime contractors and subcontractors getting together, reviewing the wage determination and realizing, oh, we're missing a carpenter here, or we're missing a bricklayer here. You're going to get together, draft up the SF 1444, and then you're going to submit that to your client, the awarding body or agency that owns the project. The agency will then review your conformance request and provide any advisory items, or they'll sign it off. And then they have the very important job of being the liaison to the Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division. Because guess what? The Department of the Wage and Hour Division, they won't communicate directly with the contractors. Okay, they're going to communicate directly with the agency. So it is important, it would behoove you to have friendly communication channels between contractors and agencies. Check in periodically with them, okay? So the Wage and Hour Division will either approve or deny it, but don't worry, if they deny it, they're going to let you know, hey, that rate that you provided, that you proposed, that's too low. We're going to suggest, and we're going to, by suggest, we're saying, you're going to pay this missing crafting class this amount of money. Now, the Wage and Hour Division are tasked with responding within 30 days of receiving a conformance request. That doesn't always happen. So just be wary of that. As contractors, it would behoove you again to just check in periodically with the agency. Hey, have you heard anything from them? Have you heard anything from them? Make sure that you're doing your due diligence. Okay. All right. The formal conformance process in a nutshell, got to double check if your classifications are missing. If they are missing, then you got to perform an analysis, meaning you're going through the wage determination and you're creating a reasonable rate for your missing craft based off of that. And you're going to fill out the SF 1444 form, and then you're going to submit that to your client. And again, all agency memos 213, 233, they're going to be your best friends. Okay, let's talk about wages and fringes themselves. How do we actually pay our employees? We're going to start at the top. So prevailing wages are broken up into two pieces, okay? The first piece is your base wage. That's paid at a fixed rate directly to your employee, paid on their paycheck for every hour that they work on a job site. The fringe benefit is the second part to the prevailing wage. So your fringe benefit is a little extra that is paid either directly to the employee as cash fringes or can be paid into a benefit plan. Or sometimes contractors decide to do a mix of both, pay a little bit as cash and pay a little bit into a benefit plan. And in total, you get your total package. That is how much the employee should be receiving in some way, shape, or form for every hour that they work on a public works project. Let's talk about what fringe benefits are acceptable, because not all fringe benefits are built the same. So acceptable or bona fide fringe benefits include health insurance, life insurance, pension plans, sick leave, vacation time. Those would be considered bona fide fringe benefits. Now, there's a difference between the fringe benefits, though. Some fringe benefits are considered funded, which is where you pay or where you take your money and then you take it off your books. You send it to a third party plan or a trustee. And examples of a funded fringe benefit is like your health insurance plans or your retirement plans, where the money leaves and you don't see it back. An unfunded plan is when money does not necessarily leave your books, but you have it tucked away somewhere for when your employees would like to use their benefit. These benefits would be like your holiday plans or your company vacation plans or your sick leave. Now, if you do decide to choose to pay fringe benefits into unfunded plans, you need to make sure that you have approval from the Department of Labor. You can reach and request the Department of Labor to approve your unfunded plans by sending your request to this email, unfunded@dol.gov. Now, a couple of things that are not fringe benefits would be benefits that are already required by the state or by federal, like taxes, Social Security contributions, workers' compensation, subsistence pay. I mean, if you're sending an employee out into the middle of nowhere to build gosh knows what, that is for the benefit of the company, not necessarily for the employee. So subsistence pay would not be considered fringe benefit under Davis-Bacon. Other things that are also not considered fringe benefits, it's a holiday bonus, the use of a company cell phone, the use of a company truck, and a Thanksgiving turkey, believe it or not. These are things that would not be considered fringe benefits. But what if you're already paying fringe benefits to plans on all of your other private work? Can you take credit for the funds that you're already paying into? And the answer is yes, my friends, you absolutely can. All you need to do, though, is that you would need to annualize the cost of your fringe benefits that you're paying into. Now, this annualization process means that you're going to have to find the hourly rate of contribution based off of the year. Now, there's a couple of approved ways that the DOL recognizes to calculate annualization of fringe benefits that you're already paying into. But for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use the following example. So Davis-Bacon is okay with you using 2,080 hours as the standard amount of hours that includes non-prevailing and prevailing wage hours together when calculating your hourly rate. So this is the calculation. So our numerator is the total cost of fringe benefits per employee. And yes, you would need to annualize per employee. You can't group them all together and create an average like that. That's a no-no. The annual cost to you would include administrative expenses from your third-party provider, but it would not include your own administrative expenses, like the amount of time it takes your payroll clerk to calculate your benefit costs. And then you would divide that by the total annual hours that your employee worked. This is where that 2,080 hours would come in handy. I'm going to give us an example. Don't worry, don't worry. So let's just say we've got one employee where you are paying $1,000 to keep a 401k account for them. You'll divide that by the estimated amount of time they would work for a year. In this case, we can use the standard 2080 hours for the year. And that will give us the maximum amount of money that you can claim as a fringe benefit for $2.08 for your 401k plan. Let's look at the numbers here. Let's say the wage determination says you got to pay them a base rate of 15 and a fringe benefit of $5. Well, now that you've annualized what you're already paying, you can take that $2.08, subtract out that from the fringe benefit that you owe, and you now are left with $2.92. So instead of owing $5 and paying $5, you now owe $2.92 on fringe benefits. And the cool thing is that you can keep annualizing your other benefit plans for this employee. Check that out. All right. We're going to keep moving because I know we're running short on time. 3 cardinal rules for paying overtime. Got to make sure that they're paid for all hours worked over 40 in a work week, and that means paying them at 1.5 times their regular rate of pay. And fringe benefits, guess what? You don't have to calculate overtime. No need to do time and a half on that. Let's do an example. So let's say you've got a carpenter that works for 44.5 hours in a work week. You're going to pay straight time for the 40 hours. You're going to pay overtime for the 4.5 hours. Now, for fringes, let's say in this example, fringes are $6 an hour. No need to multiply that by time and a half. Whew, nice, right? All you'll need to do is take that 6 hours and multiply that for all 44.5 hours. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. But what about apprentices? How do they work? Well, guess what? Not Davis-Bacon projects do not require apprentices. Isn't that interesting? However, if you do have apprentices on a Davis-Bacon project, there are some rules on how to manage them. So first off, these apprentices need to be bona fide, meaning they need to be associated with an apprenticeship program that is approved at either the state or the federal level. Okay, and they are the only workers who can be paid below journey worker wages. Now, as far as apprentices go and how to pay them, their rates are not listed on wage determinations. So wage determinations only list journey worker rates. But the cool thing is that apprentices will usually have their rates that you should be paying in their backup documentation, like their certifications, their dispatch paperwork, or your apprenticeship agreement if you have one. Now, you also need to make sure you are following the ratios for apprentices too, because when you have an apprentice on site, you need to make sure you're also having a journey worker on site with them. Now, the number of journey workers that need to be supervising that apprentice is based off of their apprenticeship program. Or if you are sending the apprentice to a project in a location outside of their apprenticeship program, you need to make sure that you're following the project location's apprenticeship program rules. So I'm going to use an example here. Let's say you've got an apprentice that is in a program local to the state of New York, but you send them off to Vermont for whatever reason. And in that job location, they've got an apprenticeship program that says, hey, for this apprentice, you actually need to pay them $50 more. This is just an example, $50 more. And you need to make sure you have 2 journey workers for this apprentice. You would need to make sure you follow those rules. The cool thing is that if that job location is silent for that particular apprentice's crafting class, oh, that's okay. You could just follow their registered program. Easy. Just fall back on that. Now, as far as fringe benefits go, that's a little different here. Now, fringe benefits should always be paid based on their apprenticeship program. That program, you will usually state if they can be paid at a percentage based off of the journey worker rate, or it might be a specific amount according to union requirements. Or if those items are silent, then they can also be paid full fringe benefits like a journey worker. Pretty cool, right? Okay, real quick question for Brendan. How are we doing on time?
Pretty good. We have basically, I've scheduled till 10:30, so we're okay
Oh,
there.
okay, fantastic.
Yeah, we do have some
Alrighty.
questions. If you want to wait till the end, it's up to you.
Okay, perfect. Well, I feel like we're getting really close to the end, so I'm going to go ahead and take those at the end then. Thank you,
Sure.
Brendan. I
Okay.
appreciate that. Yeah. Okay, let's talk deductions. Okay, how do they work on Davis-Bacon projects? There's nothing really different about deductions on a Davis-Bacon project. I'm going to be real here. There are certain deductions that are permissible per Davis-Bacon, and you can find a list of those permissible deductions under 29 CFR 3.5. There's quite a bit of them, so chances are your deductions may actually fall into one of these listed. But what happens if you have a deduction that does not fall in these permissible deductions? You would need to ask for approval, and you would need to ask the Secretary of Labor. You would reach out to them at that particular email, DBA deductions at dol.gov. There we go. Now, it would also be beneficial to you to check out 29 CFR Part 3.6 if you do have a funky little deduction that you need approved, because it will give you the steps on how to submit a good application. So you would need to make sure you're describing the proposed deduction, what purpose it's being served for, who it will be applicable for, and where the funds will eventually end up going to. So essentially, you need to show and see. Essentially, you need to show if it is a voluntary deduction or not. And I have been told that the Department of Labor really, really scrutinizes whether deductions are voluntary or not. Quick word of caution. These deductions, if approved, are applicable for all of your current and future projects for up to 1 year. So, if and when you do receive an approval from the Secretary of Labor, you've got 1 year. It would be highly beneficial if you put on your calendars close to the end of that expiration to resubmit the approval request again. Okay, so this is not forever. You've got a year and you got to resubmit for approval over and over and over again. All righty. Let's talk about restitution and record keeping for a moment. Restitution must now include interest. Okay, now I do not have the particular interest rate. Now, for those of you that are a little bit newer to this, restitution is essentially back pay that is due to the employee. So this would be like if you underpaid an employee, got to pay them restitution plus interest. Now, I know that some of us might be thinking, gosh, another thing to track. This is frustrating. I'm bleeding money out of my pockets here. You know, why should I pay interest? I want us to take a quick moment to put human faces on the names of our certified payroll reports. Imagine you're the worker, okay? That is the potential loss of food, loss of clothing, loss of rent for the family when we are underpaying our employees. I think paying interest is fair. That is money due to the employee. For the percentage rate, I would recommend checking out the IRS's website and searching for 26 USC 6621. I'm going to keep going. Record keeping. Okay, so all records must be retained for at least 3 years after the project is completed. What do I mean by backup records? I mean certified payroll reports and the backup documentation for that. Like if you have any fringe benefit statements or if you have any apprenticeship documentations, so on and so forth. Certified payroll reports can now be signed and submitted electronically. Yay! Um, Honestly, this one, whew, I have stories on this one. There were some states out there that said, hey, because Davis-Bacon doesn't technically state you can submit electronically certified payroll reports, we're going to say, forget that. We want paper certified payroll reports. Oof. I used to do manual CPRs. They were not fun. So this is a nice update here. If you choose not to submit documents during an investigation early on, then you cannot produce them later. So make sure that when an investigator requests for certain backup documentation, you are open and transparent as you can possibly be and submit your documentation early and on time. Okay, you are also required to gather worker phone numbers and email addresses. This was a change from the 2023 final updates. And in addition, contracting agencies and prime contractors can permit or require the use of an electronic system, kind of tying back to that second item in the previous slide. Okay, some things that I personally look for when I'm looking at a certified payroll report. These are some red flags here. So let's say you're looking at a subcontractor's certified payroll. If you notice any funky time tracking, like I'm talking time tracking by minutes or by piecemeal or by load or weight, those are not industry standards in the context of Davis-Bacon. That's a huge red flag. What about hours? So for example, if contractors are consistently reporting the same hours, like I'm talking rain or shine, a slow day or a really heavy day, doesn't matter. If this contractor is only submitting 40 hours a work week, week after week after week, there's no overtime or anything, that's a red flag right there. I would be scrutinizing that particular subcontractor's payrolls. Okay, some more red flags in regards to apprentices. If there's no apprentice documentation, if their certifications are expired, if they're not advancing, if they've been on the project for 2 years now and they're still an apprentice level 2, what's going on there? And if ratios are not being followed, the apprentice to journey worker ratio. Okay, last item for today, field wage interviews. Okay, now field wage interviews are I get a lot of worried, reddened, sweaty faces when I talk about field wage interviews. People start to get nervous. And this is where I'd like to say it's okay. A field wage interview more so checks the health pulse of a project. They're not necessarily out to do gotcha moments. These are not full-blown audits. These are just checking to see how compliant contractors are to Davis-Bacon rules and requirements. Let's do a quick overview here. Really, the individuals that are responsible for conducting field wage interviews are the awarding bodies and agencies. That's their responsibility. They can contract out that work to a third-party auditor. Sure, that happens, but essentially it's the awarding body's responsibility. But you guys, specifically my prime contractors, it is a best practice for you to conduct field wage interviews. That way you can see, especially if you have over 100 different contractors at a time working on your project, you can see, okay, well, let's just do a quick pulse check to see how compliant we are with Davis-Bacon rules. Essentially, how field wage interviews go is like this. Hi, I am so and so from the county of such and such, and I'm talking to an employee, right, on the job site. I'm wanting to make sure you're on a public works job site, and I want to make sure you're being paid appropriately and correctly. Can you tell me a little bit more about yourself? And they ask the employees questions. Now, sometimes these employees can be quite hesitant to share information to an individual that looks like a pencil pusher, be like, who the heck are you to ask me how much I'm being paid, right? Well, this is where the prime contractor can step in and make life a little bit easier for these interviewers. Because remember, one of the prime contractor's responsibilities is to make sure that the employees on the job site are available for the interviews. So really, the goal for the wage interviews is to double check if paper matches reality. Are the workers being paid correctly? Are the labor law posters up? Are the wage determinations also posted? The goal is to talk to employees. And you got to weed out, are there any misclassifications happening? Are we verifying the certified payroll data? Are there any ghost employees here? Is there anyone listed on a certified payroll report that never stepped onto the job site, or vice versa? Are there more people on the job site than there are listed on the certified payroll report? These are the things that we got to figure out, because as nice as it is to have your paperwork, what's on paper does not always match reality. So I'm going to throw you guys a bone and let y'all know that field wage interviewers use SF 1445 as their guide when conducting interviews. Check it out. It doesn't bite. You can find it on the website www.gsa.gov. That's all the information that they're gathering. Best practices that you can do for your teams is to educate your employees, especially for open shop contractors. Let them know what craft and classification they are and how much they're being paid. Make sure that the employees are available for interviews. Double check if your backup documentation is telling the same story as your employees will. And as far as my prime contractors go, really ask yourselves the question, are you aware of every single vendor that steps foot on your project? Hmm. Okay. And also, does everyone know what they're supposed to be doing? Do they know their specific scope of work? Okay, so some tools I'm going to leave us off with. Field Operations Handbook, Chapter 15. This is a resource that is built for investigators, and it's a really good idea to maybe know what investigators are looking at, right? Prevailing Wage Resource Book. This guy was built for contractors, and it gives a fantastic overview of the Davis-Bacon rules and requirements. Both of these can be found on the Department of Labor's website. I tossed in the all agency memorandums that I had mentioned throughout this presentation, and there's a couple of websites there too for your review. And that is it. Time for our Q&A. I know we don't have that much time, but here is also my contact information. Brendan, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Aurora. Just to let everybody know, I will be sending out a PDF copy of the presentation itself. So the links that are in there, hopefully you should be able to track those as well and visit them where you need. So yes, questions. One that came back a while back with regard to delivery drivers. It just says, what if the driver operates a boom as part of the material delivery? The boom is part of the delivery vehicle. And they basically just said this is in regards to material delivery workers being covered by prevailing wage if they get out of the truck and help unload by using a forklift.
Ooh, yeah. I feel like I would need more information on that. My gut tells me, because it sounds like it's dabbling with heavy equipment stuff, sounds like sounds like they might be covered for prevailing
We've had
wages.
that question come up before. I'm pretty positive it is covered because the minute that they move out of that cab or they move, if they're operating a boom, opposite of just
Yes.
driving the truck, then it is covered at that point.
Yeah, that smells like prevailing wages to me. Yep.
Next question is, it says, we are falling under Davis-Bacon with our solar work based on tax incentives under the IRA. In these cases, we do not have an agency we're working with, rather a private owner of the project. How would we want to approach an SF 1444?
An SF 1444, a conformance request, huh? That is a good question. Whew. Okay, I'm going to start off with IRA work is its own beautiful little beast. I would definitely prefer to provide you with some materials that you can investigate on your own. While the IRA work does lean heavily to uh, Davis Bacon rules and requirements for many items on a project, as far as conformance requests goes, I'll be honest with y'all. I don't have an answer to that. Brendan, can I do a little bit of research and then provide you what I find uh,
Sure. Yeah, and
after this
I
meeting?
can shoot that out to people, or specifically that was Holly that asked that question. I can send it back to Holly's attention. So,
Fantastic for the IRA. Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. Good question.
yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions? Those are the only ones that came up so far at this point. I know it's just past 10:30, the end time for the program itself. But again, if anybody has any other questions, wants to shoot me an email, I can also forward it on to Aurora. So,
Yes. And in addition, if there's any topic that I touched on, because I touched on a lot that anyone might want a little bit more depth in, we can do that as well. Like I had mentioned, I could go hours on just the updated certified payroll report itself. I could do the same thing for conformance requests and so on and so forth. So if there's something y'all may want to really take a dive into, let us know. We'll be happy to cater to that.
okay, excellent. Well, again, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you for everyone who attended. Again, I'll get copies of the PDF presentation out to everyone. This was recorded as well. This is something that our communications director will save and share with you. And you can, of course, forward with your other staff people if you want them to see it as well. So, with that, again, thank you, Aurora, for your time. I appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a fantastic day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.